Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Sherlockian interview. With the audio book version of the 5th volume of the Redacted Sherlock Holmes coming out this week, I'm really pleased to have the author, Orlando Pearson, for the interview this afternoon. Orlando, where are you dialing in from?
I'm dialing in from southwest London. We've had Storm Gareth over the last few days, so it's pouring with rain, and the trees are beating against the window. It looks rather like Wisteria Lodge. If I were really Sherlock Holmes, then I've no doubt I'd have had 2 or 3 fascinating clients calling, but there's been no one in this afternoon.
Well, fantastic. Well, hopefully we can brighten up the day a little bit. Let's go to the cover. This is a fantastic cover. I noticed some of the people in there I can recognise, Winston Churchill and Beethoven, but tell us a bit about it. Yeah,
well, my Sherlock Holmes stories generally link Holmes with real historical events for reasons I'd like to explain later on in the interview. The Churchill story is a very dark one. It's about the help that Holmes gave Churchill during the Battle of Britain in 1914. It's not a glorification of the events. It shows some of the very tough decisions that Churchill had to make on the advice of Sherlock Holmes during 1940. It picks up links with Silver Blaze, which has many links to the events. The way that Holmes helps Churchill is very much linked to how he solved the Silver Blaze case. And Churchill is pushed into a position which only would happen in time of desperation to make some very painful decisions. And Holmes supports him on the way to that, but he also they also fall out in the end. It is a very somber tale indeed.
And how does Beethoven fit in?
Well, this is a real life story. This is a story about Holmes's discovery of a symphony in Mannheim, where he goes out there in 1888. Holmes went out to Mannheim in 1888 after the case with Irene Adler, a scandal in Bohemia. He built up a following because of the prince. The prince whom Holmes helped told everyone in Germany about the help that Holmes had given him, and so he got clients in Germany. And while he was in Mannheim, he discovers a symphony by Beethoven. And so that's why Beethoven's there. The symphony really exists. It's actually known as the Jena Symphony. If you key that into Google, you'll find the Jena Symphony. And on the audio versions, Steve White likes the extracts I included so much he added a few more minutes of it, which I was very pleased about. It's not a very well-known piece, but I think it should be better known. But actually, the other woman is Holmes' second nemesis. This is a female nemesis. This is Bertha Benz. She was the wife of Carl Benz, the man who invented the Mercedes Patentwagen, the Mercedes-Benz Patentwagen, and the first ever motor car. And this is about Holmes's involvement with that, and she outsmarts Holmes. Holmes also, you would be pleased to know, is involved with powered flight and also with the invention of the mobile phone. But this is involved with the invention of the motor car, and Bertha Benz proves not really an antagonist of Holmes, but someone who proves herself to be rather cleverer than Holmes in this particular story. But Holmes does have the consolation of discovering a symphony by Beethoven, so he does win on something.
And if we go back to the cover of the full volume, is that Bard Kingdom Brunel in the bottom left-hand corner? It
is, yes. One of Brunel's engineering masterpieces features in the story called The Sleeper's Cache. And this is the sequel to the Bruce Partington plans. And Steve White, my reader, says you see Mycroft in this story in a totally different light. This is again quite a shocking story. Holmes is on the search for Oberstein's papers. You remember Oberstein was the spy who abstracted the Bruce Partington plans, and this story shows the shocking workings of the British government in the year 1895 when the story happens. and it links in with what's called the Jameson Raid, which is a raid on led by British troops in South Africa, and the way the British government tried to avoid responsibility for that. So it has lots of history, lots of realpolitik. Holmes does some brilliant detective work, and Mycroft emerges in the light you'll never quite have seen him before. And the story explains why Mycroft doesn't appear in the Holmesian canon after the Bruce Partington plans, because Holmes and Mycroft and Sherlock Holmes have a falling out at the end of this story. And Watson resolves not to publish any more stories about Mycroft in his lifetime. So that's why we have 3 mentions of Mycroft Holmes in the canon. We have him in The Greek Interpreter, we have him in The Final Problem, and we have him in the Bruce Partington plans, which took place in 1895. Now, given a normal lifespan, you'd expect us to have more cases with Mycroft, but we don't get those, and this story explains why not.
And in the on the main cover, you've got one of the figures is in gold, and is that the Johann Strauss statue? Which city is that in?
Yeah, if you go to Vienna, if you go to what's called the Stadtpark, which is the city park, you will see that statue. It's quite a good likeness, actually. I mean, most postcards from Vienna feature that. And this is again a story which actually takes place in 1938, around the time of the Austrian Anschluss, when the Germans ganged up on Austria and took Austria over, and the Austrians were actually quite happy about it. And a print worker disappears in London, and the trail leads Holmes to the German embassy in Carlton Gardens, and there he has an encounter with Joachim von Ribbentrop, who later was German Foreign Secretary and who was hanged after the Nuremberg trial, but at that time he was Germany's ambassador to Britain. And he's the 4th major Nazi who's appeared in my stories. I've had Rudolf Hess, I've had Joseph Goebbels, I've had Hermann Goering, people who came to the launch of Volume 4 of the Redacted Sherlock Holmes would have seen Hermann Goering portrayed brilliantly on stage, and this is Joachim von Ribbentrop. And he's been up to no good with regard to the family tree of Johann Strauss. And the story is I've invented very, very little in the story. And I sent the story to the UK Johann Strauss Society, who liked it so much they published it in their annual letter to their members. So it's going to get it's got a wide coverage. It also features music. Steve White, my reader, added famous Strauss music, which is very apposite to this particular story. And I'm looking forward to the coverage it'll get from not only from Holmes groupies, but also from Johann Strauss groupies.
Fantastic. And then the athlete that appears on the main cover comes forward onto the cover of the 4th student. And what's this story about?
This is the sequel to the 3 students. So after the end of the 3 students, Holmes is approached by Gilchrist, who you remember was the person at the centre of the scandal in the 3 students, and he tips Holmes the wink about a scandal on the athletics track, which Holmes follows up. And during the course of his investigation, Holmes ingests some lozenge-shaped duck egg blue pills called Gavira, and if you put Gavira into a search engine, you'll find out it's an anagram of a proprietary product I wouldn't dream of mentioning on this channel. And Holmes, in the interest of his research, Holmes ingests some Gavira, and it has an effect on him, and a large harpoon features in the story. And it's also a morality. This is also a morality story. It's about skullduggery on the athletics track, and it was inspired by. I read a story by a competitor of Lance Armstrong, and I thought the Lance Armstrong story could be could be turned into quite a good Sherlock Holmes story, and this is quite an entertaining one. It's quite satirical as well.
And the fifth one in the book, Three Holmesian Meditations, that makes you 5 stories.
Well, it's good to know. Could be interviewed by somebody who realizes that the little things are infinitely the most important. This is the sixth story. This is the most radical claim yet about Sherlock Holmes. This is really about who Sherlock Holmes was, and it traces some of the family background of Sherlock Holmes. You'll remember that he has a sister of Verney, the French artist, is in his family tree, and this speculates further about the genesis of Sherlock Holmes, and it quotes sections of the Bible within this Sherlock Holmes story. And there are 3 elements to the story, which is why it's called Three Holmesian Meditations. So first of all, Holmes is approached by the most illustrious client you can imagine, Mr. Devine. Mr. Devine wants some advice from Holmes about 2 creations of his, who he's found quarters for in a large garden, but who misbehaved themselves. And he wants advice from Holmes as to what to do. And you find links in that story to a canonical Sherlock Holmes story, just as the story of the Crooked Man is the story of David and Bathsheba. And in the story of David and Bathsheba, the Almighty is a good deal less harsh on David, who misbehaves himself in that, than Conan Doyle is on James Barclay, who's the villain in the Crooked Man. And this story continues a theme of mine where I look at Holmes and religious issues. So my story, The Hounding of Piers Baskerville, links up with the Theseus legend, and I've also had Holmes meet John the Evangelist and investigate whether the resurrection really happened, and he also has a political investigation both into climate change and into Christmas in my story, A Seasonal Tale. And I find religion works very well with Sherlock Holmes because religion is trying to be definitive about things it's very hard to be definitive about, and forensic detective work is often about being definitive about things that are very hard to be definitive about as well. So the links work quite well. And this has the epiphanic reasoning at the end takes place in an equinoctial gale, rather like the gale that takes place for the 5 orange pips, and it makes a very radical suggestion about Sherlock Holmes, which I won't spoil what it is, but you readers and listeners will enjoy finding it out, I think.
Very few Holmesian pastiche writers touch religion too much. We have one of our writers, Sherlock Holmes on the Roof of the World, I think is the book that Thomas has. And again, this can be quite controversial when it comes to the fan base. But this almost feels like more like a religious text than a detective story.
I think there's the famous poem 221B. Now, there's very few people who are well known enough that they are known just by their address, let alone just by the number of their address. So if you say 221B to somebody, they know immediately you're talking about Sherlock Holmes and Baker Street. Now, you might conceivably say number 10 about Downing Street in London, but I bet most people couldn't name the street number of the White House, for example, or the postal address of the Houses of Parliament. But 221B the 221B tells you that we're talking about Sherlock Holmes. There's no other figure I can think of who commands that sort of recognition.
And it seems like you've got a real mix of inspirations. How much fact and fiction is there in this 5th collection?
All the stories have a basis in facts. All the stories feature real people. I welcome controversy. I think I want people to be intrigued and piqued by my stories. The Church Times, you can see the religious connection with my stories. The Church Times described my stories as being clever, thought-provoking, and terrific fun. And I hope this latest collection is all of those things, but particularly thought-provoking. These stories are meant to provoke people to to question what they know about the Holmesian world. So Mycroft does not come across in a flattering light in the stories of Sleeper's Cash. Holmes, the suggestions about Holmes in the Three Meditations are very radical indeed. Not everyone will like it, but I hope everyone will be intrigued by it. And I do substantiate all the suggestions that I make in my stories.
I guess a lot of people listening will be really wondering where you get your ideas from.
Yeah, well, I read a lot of history. I studied literature at university. I follow current affairs closely, and I work in business. I'm an accountant by training, and a lot of the stories that involve Holmes have business problems in them. I have thought about doing Sherlock Holmes a business because I've had 3 or 4 stories where he solves business problems or identifies business malpractice, and I think that works quite well. I think if you look at the list of people, you've got John Maynard Keynes there, who's a businessman, who's the ultimate economist. You have stories about politics in there. You can see Saddam Hussein in there. You can see Churchill in there. You can see Edward VII in there. You have all sorts of political stories in there as well. Satire works very well with Sherlock Holmes because Sherlock Holmes can be relied upon to tell it as it is, and you can create a bubble of something that's happening, and then Sherlock Holmes can come along and prick it because he can see through the bubble and nobody else can. So I do find the Sherlock Holmes model a very good way of investigating all sorts of problems that I'm interested in, and all these stories are about problems that I'm interested in. So the story about the athlete is about doping in sport. It has many. The practice that's referred to in the story wasn't banned until the 1980s, but has been going on for probably the best part of a century. And Holmes was able to solve it in 1908. And if you look at the medal tables of the Olympic Games from 1908 to 1928, you can track how the trick that Holmes identifies was used by countries to boost the performance of their athletes.
And we've got the 5 covers displayed here, and obviously they're available in print and ebook. But we mentioned at the top of the interview there that the 5th collection is just being released now on audio. And you mentioned Steve White, the narrator. So does Steve do this in one? Do the stories in one voice, or does he go across the characters? How does that go?
He's brilliant. He is utterly superb at creating voices. So in the last collection, in the volume 5, he has to do 20 different voices. He has to imitate a German lady. He has to imitate Winston Churchill. He has to imitate a really rather unpleasant German man. In other books, he's done Italians, he's done Dutch, he's done Indian, he's done men, he's done women, he's done people of all sorts of social classes. He does a lot, and occasionally, but only very occasionally, I suggest a slightly different voice he might use. And unfortunately, he's kind enough to do the voices that I suggest. And he has an amazing versatility in doing voices and bringing out the right expressions from each character.
Fantastic. And I thought we might play ourselves out at the end of the interview with a piece of classical music that you've used for this collection. So it remains to thank you very much, Orlando, for the interview this afternoon. And we're going to play out with Vivaldi's Concerto Grosso D in minor.